Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome to today's reading from Brilliant as the Sun, a retelling of Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Mysteries of Creation. We're reading from Chapter 9, The Lord Instructs Brahma. Gathering his thoughts, Brahma humbly replied, "My dear Lord, you are in everyone's heart and therefore know my desires." Narayan smiled and nodded encouragingly but said nothing. Brahma continued, "You are always transcendental, yet you accept the form of the material universe. Kindly fulfill my desire and explain this mystery to me." "Surely," said Narayan in his enchanting voice, "but first tell me if there is anything else you wish to know." Captivated by the Lord's kindness, Brahma continued, "Lord, you employ both your spiritual and material energies to create, maintain, and destroy the universe. I would like to know their respective qualities. I will explain. Is there anything else?" "It seems to me you manifest both the material and spiritual worlds from your own body, just as spider spins its web. Still, I wish to know if you relate differently with your material and spiritual energies." Brahma paused and waited patiently, and again Narayan encouraged him. "These are deep questions, my dear Brahma. Is this all?" "There is one last thing, my lord," Brahma said with an earnest expression. "I greatly fear becoming proud and thereby forgetting you. Kindly instruct me how I may execute my service of creation only for your pleasure whilst always fully depending on you. I dread being carried away by the false notion that I am the controller." Prayerfully clasping his hands together, Brahma continued in a choked voice, "O Lord, you have treated me as a friend, even shaking my hand. For my part, however, I desire only to serve you. Therefore, for the duration of my tenure as Brahma, I shall conscientiously execute my duty of providing the living entities with appropriate bodies. My fervent prayer is that you protect me from falsely taking credit for my service. Please ensure that I always remember I am but your instrument and my ability and knowledge come from you." Smiling with affection at Brahma's humility, Narayan said, "It is difficult to comprehend the truths about me. They are most confidential and can only be understood when I reveal them to those who please me by their service. Listen carefully. By my grace, you will realize the mysteries of my diverse transcendental manifestations, including the sweetness of my original form as Krishna." Slowly twirling the lotus flower in his hand, the Lord looked at Brahma, his eyes moist with tears of affection. "Your first question was, how do I accept the material form of the universe? Even though I am ever transcendental." Touching his forefinger to his chest, Narayan said, "My dear Brahma, only I exist before the creation of the material universe. I alone exist as the cosmos, and only I remain after its destruction." Brahma was puzzled. Did the Lord's associates here in Vaikuntha not exist before and after the creation? Was there a time when Narayan was alone? Understanding his doubt, Narayan said, "When I say only I exist before the creation, that includes my Vaikuntha associates, since they are a part of me. My point is that nothing and no one in the material world existed, including the gods and even you or Shiva." Brahma remained perplexed. He looked around at the Lord's companions who stood on either side, some fanning Narayan, some holding refreshments, others playing musical instruments, and many simply listening to their conversation. What did the Lord mean that they were his parts? Are they also Narayan? Again divining his confusion, Narayan explained, "I am everything, but I manifest as dominator and predominated. You are in this latter category." Brahma considered this carefully. Narayan expands himself into many to enjoy pastimes. As the dominator, he receives service from his predominated forms, thereby enjoying loving exchanges with them. What though did he mean when he said that he alone exists during the creation? Narayan explained, the material universes are an expansion of my energies, which are nothing but me. Therefore, I am the material cosmos. Noting Brahma's puzzled expression, Narayan indicated a group of 4 of his attendants who stood nearby, one beautiful lady resembling the goddess of fortune, and 3 handsome youths, each identical with the Lord. The material world is a product of these 4 energies. Although they remain invisible. Turning to his 4 associates, Narayan said, please introduce yourselves to Brahma. First, the lady of radiant charm stepped forward, her head bowed in shyness, covering her face with the end of her sari. She spoke in a mellifluous voice. I am Prakriti, the Lord's creative material energy. My other names are Devi Maya, as I am Lord Narayan's illusory energy, and also Durga, because none can surpass my laws. She then gracefully stepped back to her place, light behind Narayan. On his indication, the first of the 3 youths stepped forward in a voice like rumbling thunder. He said, I am Purush, the Lord's incarnation for material creation. I first manifest as Mahavishnu, from whom all the universes emanate. I then expand myself to enter each of them, and I also accompany every living being as the Paramatma. Brahma placed his palms together and humbly bowed his head before Vishnu, who, looking kindly upon him, stepped back. The next youth stepped forward and said, for the purpose of material creation, I become the Mahat Tattva. Indeed, I am the source of the entire cosmic manifestation. Brahma raised his eyebrows and glanced over at Prakriti. Was she not the origin of the cosmos? Mahat Tattva smiled and said, Prakriti is dormant until Purusha impregnates her with the rebellious souls and time. I manifest when Prakriti and Purusha thus unite. In me, the 3 modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, become active, and material creation gains momentum. Finally, the 4th of the Lord's creative energies stepped forward and introduced himself as Ego. In resonant tones, he explained, in the material world, I make the living beings think. I am my material body, an independent enjoyer and controller. Brahma strained to comprehend the truths being revealed to him. Everything material and spiritual was Krishna's expansion. In the spiritual world, his energies increased the loving relationships between the Lord and his parts, while in the material world, these same energies concealed the Lord. So the living beings could indulge their illicit desires to imitate him. Placing his palms together, Brahma bowed his head before Narayan and said, I understand your universal form comprised of your energies, which yogis know as the Virat Roop. A spiritual, the conditioned souls, however, perceive it as material because they are deluded by these energies. Narayan smiled in confirmation and said, I shall now answer your second question. You want to know the difference between how my external material energy and my internal spiritual energy are involved in the creation. Is that correct? Without looking at her, Narayan lifted a graceful hand to indicate Prakriti standing behind him. You have already been introduced to my material energy, Devi Maya. By her influence, the conditioned souls do not see how everything is connected with me. She is like darkness which hides the truth. As Narayan spoke, Prakriti lowered her head, embarrassed by her thankless service. The Lord then turned to Goddess Lakshmi, who was personally fanning him. She smiled benevolently and at Brahma as Narayan spoke about her. Behind my internal spiritual energy, by her grace, repentant souls are drawn to me. And when they are free of material desire, she reveals to me them to me. She reveals me to them, again indicating Prakriti with a casual wave of his hand. The Lord added, Prakriti is but a reflection of Lakshmi. Brahma looked back and forth between the smiling Goddess Lakshmi standing close by the Lord with an effulgent white fan in her delicate hand, and Devi Maya, who stood with her head cast down behind Narayan. They looked like mirror images of each other. But what was the mirror? Narayan smiled. The mirror is the desire of the restless souls to enjoy independently from me. Brahma asked, what happens when the living beings has such desires? The Lord replied, initially Prakriti covers them, making them forget my supreme position. Once they forget me, she is able to throw them into the dark material cosmos under the false impression that they are independent controllers and enjoyers. Brahma asked, how does Goddess Lakshmi act? Narayan smiled. When the conditioned souls become materially exhausted and aspire to know the truth, my beloved consort arranges for the transcendental knowledge of me to reach them via a self-realized pure devotee. By her grace, anyone who sincerely tries to assimilate this knowledge will understand my supreme position. They will also understand that I alone can help them, even though I am beyond their vision. Just as a great fire can diffuse heat and light from a distant place. How do these fortunate souls progress? Narayan replied, as they develop their transcendental knowledge, they realize they belong to my spiritual energy just like my associates here. The Lord waved his bejeweled hand elegantly towards his many associates who stood listening to the conversation. All beings are parts of me, and thus they derive pleasure by satisfying me in spiritual consciousness. They know this, but in ignorance they forget. Since the living beings are your parts, are they as good as you? Asked Brahma. Although there is a very little difference between us, replied the Lord, they are not completely equal to me. The Lord gave the example of fire and its heat. Heat is intrinsic to fire, but there is more to fire than just heat. The Lord continued, in my original form as Krishna, I have 64 transcendental qualities. In this form of Narayana, I exhibit 60. In my forms as the living beings, I exhibit only 50. Thus they are me, but not in full. Brahma sat in silent thought. He understood better how the Lord's internal and external energies worked. All beings are small Krishnas, as the hand is in one sense the body, but not the whole body. As the hand is meant to serve the body, the living beings should similarly serve Krishna. When they become restless and desire to satisfy themselves independently, the Lord's external energy, Prakriti, makes them forget Krishna and their eternal connection with him. She deludes them into thinking they are independent of Krishna and can control and enjoy by their own efforts. The internal energy, however, acts through the Lord's pure devotees to reclaim the fallen souls when they become exhausted with their futile attempts at material enjoyment. When Narayan was satisfied at Brahma and had understood, he addressed the third question. You asked me how I relate differently with my external and internal energies. Brahma listened carefully to my explanation. Just as the universal elements enter the cosmos and at the same time stay without, similarly I exist within everything created whilst remaining without. Brahma's face clouded with confusion. Enter and not enter at the same time. What does it mean? Even as Brahma wrestled with the idea, Narayan turned up to a group of his associates who stood nearby and said, Please introduce yourself to Brahma. The 16 handsome youths with complexions like Narayan, dressed and decorated similarly to the Lord, briefly conferred. 5 of them then stepped closer and introduced themselves as Lord's personified energies responsible for manifesting earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Then they stepped back and 5 others moved forward, introducing themselves as personified energy responsible for manifesting the knowledge acquiring senses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and skin. When they withdrew, the other 5 approached and introduced themselves as the personified energies responsible for manifesting the working senses, hands, legs, stomach, rectum, and genital. Finally, the 16th stepped forward alone and introduced himself as the personified expansion responsible for the mind. The Lord smiled at them, then he called out, Let my Tanmatra energies introduce themselves. 5 equally handsome associates came forward and respectfully introduced themselves at sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. Brahma was astonished to see that all the elements of material creation existed in their original spiritual forms in Vaikuntha. How, though, did they both enter and not enter the material world? Narayan said, Here in the spiritual world, my energies are fully conscious as they desire to enjoy the happiness of serving me. When on my order they descend to the material universe, they remain unconscious as they have no attachment to enjoying there. Similarly, I also do not enjoy the material energy. Therefore, I enter the cosmos as facsimile of myself, Purusha, while I personally remain in the Vaikuntha. Brahma's eyes opened wide with wonderment. He felt blessed to receive such confidential knowledge. Narayan continued, As Vishnu, the Purusha avatar, I entered the material energy to regulate and facilitate the rebellious soul's desires. But I have no personal attachment to matter, thus I remain hidden from those under her influence. However, I am charmed by the spiritual energy, therefore I show myself and perform loving pastimes with my pure devotees who take full shelter of that energy. Narayan's exquisite dark features broke into a captivating smile, revealing rows of perfectly formed pearl-like teeth. This leads into your 4th question. How can you perform your duties in such a way as to attain life's highest goal without being deluded by pride and false ego? Narayan explained that everyone is searching for happiness, but they wrongly equate it with sensual gratification. This is due to a misconception of the self. The first step to attaining spiritual, eternal happiness is to sincerely inquire about the nature of the self and life's purpose. Then, by Lord's grace, the inquisitive soul begins to find the answers he seeks. Brahma asked, Will all conditioned souls learn directly from you just as I have? My dear Brahma, because you are the first living being in the universe, I have personally instructed you. Now you should pass these teachings on to others. When your students have properly assimilated this knowledge, They should also in turn teach others. This transference of the knowledge from a realized teacher to a sincere student is called parampara, or hierarchy of teachers. A person who makes proper inquiry from an authorized spiritual master in parampara will, like you, attain life's perfection, direct association with me. Brahma had a doubt. A spiritual master may be in parampara, but what if he misunderstands and misrepresents the teachings? How does one know if a teacher has properly understood the truth? Nodding to indicate his approval of Brahma's question, Narayan replied, authorized spiritual masters can clear all confusions. They do not speculate but support their answers on both direct and indirect teachings with scriptural evidence. Brahma considered the Lord's reply. Direct and indirect teachings. As Brahma contemplated the matter, understanding came to him from within his heart. Direct teachings are those that instruct the living being to awaken his loving relationship with Krishna through Bhakti Yoga, beginning with hearing and discussing about Krishna, as well as meditating on the teachings and pastimes of the Lord, his incarnations, his eternal associates. The indirect or the secondary teachings relate to how the society should be organized to optimally facilitate the practice of sadhana bhakti, or in other words, varnashram dharma. Brahma bowed his head respectfully and said, I understand my Lord. Smiling, the Lord leaned towards Brahma and said, my dear Brahma, always carefully contemplate and follow these instructions, and you will never be disturbed by false pride, falsely thinking yourself independent. Narayan then disappeared along with his associates and abode. Brahma was again sitting on his golden lotus surrounded by darkness. Now, however, he felt able to create the material universe just as it had been prior to the last devastation. With this, we finish our 9th chapter. The Lord Instructs Brahma. We'll begin the next chapter, the 10 subjects of Bhagavatam, which is the final chapter of this is Canto 2 here. Thank you for joining. Hariam Tat Sat. Hare Krishna.